Special Operations, Covert Ops, Espionage, The Team House, with your hosts, Jack Murphy and David Park.
Our actions with the ground force and with the customer. And so the most impactful mission I was ever on was actually, it wasn't necessarily a successful mission. It was actually a really dangerous mission that ended up in the loss of an aircraft. And I got the opportunity to work with two of the most amazing warriors that I'd ever met in my life, which was John Brown and Annie Harville. They're part of the 24th STS, and they both passed away in Extortion 17. And this particular rotation to Afghanistan, it was my third or fourth time over there, and I wouldn't say I was seasoned, but I was definitely trained, and I could, conduct my mission or my job properly. And the team that I was on was just incredible. The crew members were incredible, all of them. The pilots were incredible, and we had already started to hit the ground running with this particular team. And so in the 160th, you've got guys who ride with you sometimes who perform special tasks. And so John and Andy were on a team that was assigned to us in case aircraft crashed or someone went down and needed to be rescued. And, they're the PJs and the combat controllers. And so we kind of cut our teeth on this rotation when the Air Force's Special Operations Wing had an Osprey crash north of Kandahar. And so it was a very kind of low illumination night. And we were sitting in the JOC, waiting on our target to hit. And the Air Force guys had gone out and they were conducting a mission with a customer. And we more or less got the word that they had crashed. And so we had to launch in the middle of the night, zero illumination, really bad weather. It was raining to a target. We had to fly the systems to the target, land without seeing the ground, it's common. We're trained to do that. But that was my first introduction to that customer set, that level of personality. And so John and Andy went in there and they saved people's lives. They got people out of that aircraft. And I had a newfound appreciation for those guys. And so I would hang out with them a lot. They're very professional. They were very tactful in the way that, they operated with us because they're not necessarily a main assault effort, that unit. They do a lot of supporting activities, and sometimes they're attached to a main effort. But they really showed their kind of true colors and their grit on another mission, which is the most amazing mission I think of cooperation I've ever seen between different assets, ground forces, regular conventional army units that I ever had to participate in. And it was a mission where we were flying from Kandahar out west to the Arghandab River Valley. And it was to go grab some personality. Doesn't matter. I don't remember the guy's name. And it was on a hot night in the middle of the summer. And we were going to go infill a blocking force. And so a blocking force typically will be infilled, offset from the target, away from the main location. Then they'll maneuver in and they'll either surround it or provide a position that denies the enemy avenues of escape from the main target. And so we infilled this force. They maneuvered into the target. And, of course, every bad guy in Afghanistan lives near the water. So this target was on the river. And so we infilled the main blocking force and went back to base. And this is a two infill mission to grab the main effort to infill them right to the X. So blocking forces in position. We pick up the main effort. We're infilling them to the X. So literally the customer steps off the ramp and they're on the front doorstep going to the bad guy's house to breach and clear, grab them. And, at this point, hopefully we're in holding and we're going to come back in and quickly land and we'll get the personality off the target. But inbound to the second infill, the illumination, still wasn't great, but dust started to pick up. And the main HLZ that we were going into was very difficult to see for the lead aircraft. And so as we're short final to the target, typically we'll land very close to each other. As a Chalk 2 pilot, you're looking at Chalk 1, kind of making sure you're landing off of his cues. And we always have alternate HLZs. And so when he was inbound to land, his main HLZ was failed and he had to flex to the alternate. And so as he flexed to the alternate and came in and landed, he landed on a berm and the wheels of that aircraft went up into the fuel tanks and completely disabled the aircraft. And so as Matt and I are landing in Chalk 2, We download our customer. We're having our crew members look over to Chalk 1 to see if, if they're ready to take off, because usually it's take off in lead order or by exception, take off after X number of time or whatever the case is. And so he didn't take off and we took off, and we looked back over our shoulders, swung our electro-optical sensor around to see what was going on. His blades are spinning down, and we were like, oh shit, we think he's shot down or something. I mean, we're on the X here. And so customers, you can see the customer running to the target, and and I can't remember if they were shooting or not, but you could definitely see the blades spinning down. And so we kind of went into reaction mode and do what we do best. We did contingency management. My co-pilot, Matt, took control of the aircraft, started flying it. He was making radio calls down to the JTAC on the ground, and I was making calls back up to the Tactical Operations Center to kind of see what they were seeing and try to figure it out. And what we found out is that they were completely disabled, had no comms. And so my co-pilot and I, with the crew, made the decision to go back in, land, and get them out as fast as possible, load up any weapons, load up all the sensitive items. And so we kind of put ourselves between them and the other side of the river. So if you can imagine a river, a landing zone, and then the target, while on the other side of the river, they're completely exposed from sniper fire or for some other type of supporting effort that saw the crash or whatever to come in. And so we landed, put ourselves between them and the river and the exposed side. We loaded them all up, and we took off back to base. And so there was a 47 on the target. I think probably the first one since Roberts Ridge that was just left there. And a sliver of the support by fire element came over, put an element in front of the aircraft or surrounded the aircraft to protect it. And we went back to base. And so my immediate efforts were, okay, we got a spare. Let's get the spare loaded. Let's have maintenance get out there, running up to level 2. We'll make sure that the aircraft is ready. All the fills are loaded. The radios are good. It's got enough fuel. It's got contingency fuel in it. And so as we're coming back into base, maintenance is just standing by all these trucks. The bird's ready to go. The lights are on. The fills are loaded. The screens are on. And so we get back to base and we download all the crew. We get back into the TOC. And at that same point, we had lightning struck twice that night. We had another down aircraft.
Oh, wow.
And so we're in the TOC, and the commander's looking at half leader number 1, and the other half commander wasn't there. And so he was just kind of standing there, and it's like, we have 2 aircraft down on a target. What are we going to do? And so I was with our lead maintenance pilot, who was a CW5 Tricky, who's just this amazing kind of leader and maintainer, an aviator, and some senior enlisted guys. And I just said, look, we're going to go get it. We're going to go in, we're going to get this aircraft, and no matter what it takes, we're going to get this thing back so that it doesn't fall into the hands of the enemy. And so at this point, John and Andy are on the ground on the target, and they have their kind of support team back at base. And we walk out to the aircraft, and we load up saws, and we load up water and a generator and an ag poo and literally every single thing you could think of to take out there. And we loaded up and we flew to the target. And by the time we got to the target, as you could imagine, it's probably late in the evening and the sun was coming up.
Yeah.
And so I'm in kind of behind our 2 other pilots. We're flying to the target. It's a full aircraft of just dudes, right? And they're not assaulters, they're maintainers, they're trained, but they're ready to turn wrenches and do whatever is required to get that aircraft off the target. And so as we're landing into the target, the enemy just immediately opens up. All the miniguns start going. The ground force starts shooting across the river, and it turns into a gunfight for a little while. All these maintainers are on the ground with wrenches and saws and tools and their weapons by their side. And so we're just hunkered down in this kind of foxhole waiting for the fire to drop. I mean, these guys aren't exposed to this all the time, right?
Right.
And so Andy and John are on the ground. They set up a perimeter. They've got comms with A-10s, who are the kind of the close air support aircraft, and also a 58D Kiowa Warrior that's on station. So Andy and John are talking to these guys, and we're taking fire from across the river. And I look up, and it's a 58 Delta, and I was like, I wonder who is in that 58D. And so the reason I remember this mission is because it was one of my college classmates. He was actually in that 58 Delta. His name was Nick. And I looked up and I was like, I bet you, because I knew Nick had just got into country. I met him like 2 days prior. And I go, I bet you that's Nick, because he was in the AO. And so I see Nick coming up at a crest into a bump, and he is just diving, smoking the dog shit out of this fighting position. And after that, I just know the fire stopped. And so, I just remember that one moment. I looked to Andy, who was running the stack, and he is just a beast of a guy. He's running 50 ADs in, he's running A10s in. And so at this point, the enemy stops. We've got the ground force on the target. They've got the personality off. They pull the guy off the target. They get him off. They land a DAP, and Dave and some of the guys from the assault unit come in to pick him up. And we're sitting there on this target with a 47. And we don't have, I wouldn't say we didn't have a ton of experience, but we literally took saws to this aircraft, and you could see the people at Boeing just crying. We were cutting blades off. We cut engines off. We cut the probe off. We cut the ramp off. We cut the wheels off. I was like, get rid of it. Just cut it. Just cut it. And so John Brown, who was the PJ at the time, he's like, hey, sir, we can get these engines off. I can get them back. And I was like, nope, cut them and leave them. Because we were trying to get this aircraft out. And the only way to do that is what? Sling load it, right?
Yeah.
So we're trying to eliminate this weight. And at the same time, we're trying to make sure that the perimeter is secure. And so we set up this big perimeter. We have a regular Army unit come in from the south to help us. And we're at this point where most of the stuff is out of the aircraft. And so if you think of the Chinook, it's just got these two big pods on the side, these two big fuel bladders, right? And so I'm at this point where I'm like, what's the last thing we can do to reduce weight? Because it's really hot out. And so things that affect helicopters are weight and temperature and airspeed and altitude and all these things. And so I just said, all right, we gotta drain the fuel out of the aircraft. And so, you're draining this fuel, and it's basically like a firecracker ready to go off. And so I have Charlie, who's one of our maintainers, go over. He dumps the drain fuel on both of the fuel tanks, and the fuel starts to come out. And so I remember as he's taking the fuel out, I look over, and this dude pops up out of nowhere with an RPG and just clicks it off.
What?
Right toward us.
Oh my God.
And I'm like, I just saw my life flash before my eyes. All the guys, their eyes were really wide, and they were looking, and this thing, kind of went off into the distance, and I just ran over to the berm. I went safe to semi, everyone en massed over on this berm. And I remember looking over at Andy Harville, who was, again, just this beast of a guy, and he was ready to walk over and just go down into this little kind of, it was a Carez system, which is a cave system, or like a tunnel system. And this dude had came up, clacked it off, and went down the hole. And so we almost ended the whole mission right there. And he had come in through a cave system into the perimeter, underneath the forward kind of security.
They're underwater aqueducts, right?
Yeah, they're some type of aqueduct system. Sometimes they dig them out themselves. And so if you're there for a century and you have, everyone's coming to fight, you kind of have an escape route. And so, we're just, at this point, we're taking fire from this location, and then we take sniper fire from across the river. And so I go to Andy, and I'm like, we need to bring everything that you have into the stack and start having them do shows of force, low pass. So he called up an A10, and this A10 came down and literally was below our eye level in the river, just doing these low passes. And after that, for the next 5 or 6 hours, we didn't have any problems. So it's midday at this point. We've got all the fuels out of the aircraft, all the sensitive items, and now our maintainers are starting to remove the blades of this aircraft. And so Charlie and George and these other guys are up on the top of the aircraft, and they're sawing a rotor blade off of the aircraft with this saw from Home Depot, and I think they went through 7 or 8 blades.
Wow.
And so Charlie and George are up there cutting these blades off, and we start to take fire again. And they can't hear the fire. So they're still cutting the blades off while we're under fire. And I'm trying to get them down, and they're like, we're almost done. And so they saw these blades off. They fall to the ground, and we get in this foxhole, and it's just like this continuous back and forth with the enemy for hours. So long story short is, that was midday, and we couldn't get extraction. And so we ended up remaining over day through the rest of the night. And the next morning, an MH-53 Marine Corps aircraft comes in, lands next to the aircraft. And I remember we had these blue lines pulled up. They were on the main rotor system, the rotor head. And they were pulled up to a central point. And I walked in, and there was one crew chief and 2 pilots. And I walked up into the cockpit, and I looked over, and it was a lieutenant colonel who was flying. And I looked down at his name tape, his little flight badge, and his call sign was the shit. That was his call sign. And so this dude, I go in there and I give him a thumbs up. I give him, we're hooked up. And so he's like, get the fuck out of here. We got to go. So he picks it up, and this 53 stresses to the max, and these guys take off. And when you take a sling load, if it starts to go in any direction, I mean, the first thing is just punch it. And so those guys didn't punch it. They stuck with it. And they ended up getting that aircraft all the way back to base. And they set it down in some pallets. They saved it, rescued the aircraft. And right behind the 53 was our brothers who had the other 2 aircraft back at base, came and loaded us up with the ground force and got us back to base safely. And so that was the highlight of my career, not just because, we made it out, but because I had the best maintainers, we had the best pilots, we had the best folks back on the talk helping us. But more importantly, that customer that we were serving, the customer that we had with us, John and Andy, who perished on Extortion 17, I mean, they were just incredible. They did their job. They performed excellently. They were just shining examples of what a stellar operator should look like. And, every August or so, the unit cheers and toasts those guys because of those moments we had.
That must have been
a long story, but that was my most impactful mission. And it wasn't just a one-person effort. It was a team effort. And you had guys, maintainers, you had medics, you did everyone. It was like this orchestra. And even though shit went wrong, like we still made it out of there and we turned it into a successful mission. That aircraft didn't fall into the hands of the enemy. And it was back in Afghanistan 6 months later. And that's a true testament to Boeing and Lockheed and the Graybeards back at Fort Campbell, who just built this thing back on a laser stand within 3 to 4 months.
That's amazing. What was that experience like for you?